Hello, this is the History Literacy Ready course, Unit 2, Lesson 6, Comparing Two Presidential Speeches. So what are students going to do? In this lesson, they're going to read and annotate two speeches, one from President Eisenhower, one from President Kennedy, compare and contrast them, make a claim and provide evidence about the difference between the two speeches, and write a précis or summary for one of the speeches. In Activity 1, they're going to review SOAPStone. Remember that they have already done SOAPStone a number of times, so this is going to be a short review. And they will then learn that they will be reading the two speeches, so they're going to do some preview of them. The first speech is Eisenhower's farewell address in 1961. The second is JFK's commencement address at American University in 1963. So the first thing you have to know as a teacher is that you need to remind students that if they're doing the SOAPStone activity, it isn't just a labeling or a fill-in-the-blank activity. You're really trying to help students think about the relationship between who the author is, to whom they're speaking, what the purpose is, and so on. These all relate to the perspective that's being taken in this particular document, and perspective is something that historians rely on when they're trying to interpret history. So you're thinking about what claims are being made and what evidence is used. So in Activity 2, students are actually using SOAPStone. In Activity 1, you were just reminding them about the activity. And Activity 2, they're actually using SOAPStone to contextualize the documents. Remember that SOAPStone stands for speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, tone, and attitude of the speaker. Now they won't be able to really think about the tone and attitude until they actually get into the two documents, but at this point they might be able to tell something from reading a paragraph or so. What you need to know about these two documents is that these speeches were 2 years apart, and getting students to recognize that time frame is really important because the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred between the two speeches. Now these audiences were different, but their purpose was really fairly similar, and it was to lay out a direction in which the nation should proceed. Both of the documents were concerned with the communist threat from the USSR that had not gone away and actually had gotten worse because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But you have to think about the difference in the way the USSR was talked about in between these two documents. As I said, they won't be able to figure out tone, but they can make some hypotheses about tone from the preview of the documents and using SOAPStone as a preview. And then when they get into the documents, they can think about that some more. So in Activity 3, they've done the SOAPStone, so they thought a lot about the context of the documents, and now they're going to read the documents. I'm giving them 3 purposes for reading. One of them is, what were the concepts of liberty in relation to foreign affairs? Remember, that is the essential question guiding the entire unit. And then another purpose is to better understand the changing conceptions and responses to the Cold War. And of course, that has to do with how we actually entered the Vietnam conflict, which is the second topic of this unit. And the third thing we want to do is learn to determine the arguments Eisenhower and Kennedy made and the evidence used to back up those arguments. Sophisticated readers of history need to be able to recognize claims and evidence and be able to write claims and evidence. And this is something that this lesson addresses. Now, before they read, remind students again the kinds of things that you look for in history text, and that is actors, goals, motivations, tactics, strategies, chronology, etc. These are things that are in history texts that students can pick out as being kind of important information. And always, as students read the text, you're asking them to be thinking about vocabulary. If they come to a word that they're having trouble with understanding, and it's really blocking the understanding of the text. This is an important vocabulary word, and you've given them some strategies to help them figure out these vocabulary words on their own. So rather than tell them, have them grapple with these words at first. But then if you see that students are really struggling with one word, maybe the whole class is one or two words, it's okay to stop and have a discussion of word meaning as they're reading, or right after they read. But you want them to try to figure out these on their own, because that's something they're going to have to do as they go through college. After they read, there's a whole list of sentences there that are taken from the two documents, and you might have them use the strategies for vocabulary to interpret those sentences. The sentences have the words bolded so that they know which words those are, and they can work in pairs or small groups. There are a lot of sentences there, so you might want to divide up the sentences among the pairs or small groups and have students share out when they're done what their interpretation of the sentence is, especially given that vocabulary word. When students finish reading, they're going to use a graphic organizer. It's a comparison contrast chart. And they're using that graphic organizer to compare the two speeches. When they do that, they're going to, in thinking about those differences, they're going to make a claim about the difference between the two speeches and back up the claim with evidence. Provide reasoning for the relation between the evidence and the claim, and then evaluate their work. And they're going to be seeing a model that they can use to compare their work to the model. This is the graphic organizer that I'm asking them to complete to do the comparison contrast. You see, those are the questions guiding the reading of the document. The first question I broke down into two parts. How was the U.S. responding to the Cold War? How was the USSR responding to the Cold War? And what they do is they answer the document from Eisenhower's point of view and then from Kennedy's point of view, and they show where the evidence in the text was that helped them to answer that question. Once they get the comparison contrast chart completed, then they can be thinking about the differences between those and think about their reasons for making a claim about those differences. There is an example from the text, in the text, to show how reasoning is, and that uses a very familiar example, and that is that the difference between two sisters is that one is more mature than the other. The evidence for this is that the mature one saves her money and the other one does not. And the reason that might be is because one of the sisters is older and the other one is younger. And so it goes through that reasoning about how you have to be thinking about not only the claim and the evidence, but the reason that's behind the claim and the evidence. So give students time to write their claim and evidence, given the example. And then there is a model that shows how you might set up a claim and argument and reasoning. And so when students finish writing that, they can read the model, and then there is an evaluation guide that they can use to evaluate their own claim and evidence and reasoning, and then revise if they need to. And they can, you can think about the ways that you could facilitate this in your classroom by having students work together, by sharing out, by modeling, by doing those things that you know will help to make this activity work. Finally, students are going to write a précis or a summary. And again, they're going to see a model of a précis. They're also going to discuss a list of do's and don'ts about précis writing. And they're going to work on a précis together with the teacher on the Eisenhower speech. So you're going to take them through writing of a précis using the Eisenhower speech. And then they're going to practice on their own using the Kennedy speech. Finally, they're going to evaluate that précis. If they have completed the English unit, they've really written a précis before, but there are differences between the kind of précis that they have been taught to write in English and the one they're writing for history. And you might need to point out those differences. Be sure to note the differences yourself, and then to read the models on page 145 and through 147, the teacher's guide, before you actually do this activity, so you get a little bit of an idea about the characteristics of the précis writing that you're doing in the history part of this class. So the other thing you need to know is that it may be that you will have to you'll have to think about some ways of sharing out this information when they're done, after they've read the model, they've written their précis, they've evaluated their work, how you're going to assign grades, how you're going to use that evaluation, and what you're actually going to share with the students in the class. That is best decided on by you, because you know your students and what works best for them. And that's the end of lesson 6. I hope you enjoyed the lesson and that students get a lot out of it.